The Prequels by George Lucas. The Star Wars Prequels by George Lucas. These are the stories, the beginning of the story, as we saw the original trilogy starting in 1977. Many of us saw it in theaters for the first time. And then in 1999, The Phantom Menace. And we're looking at the prequels as a text, as individual patterns emerge, and as also characters and special effects, camera, lighting, audio, and all of that. And we're going to be looking at the prequels from the point of view of approaching a sacred text provided to us by the creator, George Lucas, and his followers, the prophets, if you will, the directors, the movie makers, those that have brought together the stories and created movies out of these ideas that George Lucas gave us. And we're studying the prequels as a text, a sacred text, if you will, with characters, an agenda, of course, the author. Why did the author write the story? Who is the audience? And what is the purpose of the story? To tell what? And according to what point of view and in what frame? And of course, when you take a look at the original trilogy, you have the story of Luke Skywalker, along with Leia Skywalker, and then of course Darth Vader, who is the father of Luke Skywalker and the father of Leia Skywalker, as Luke and Leia are twins, brother and sister. It's the story of redemption. It's the story of fathers, sons, daughters, generations. But how did they get there? How did we get to this point, as we saw in the original trilogy, beginning with episode 4? And then we see in episode 1, the beginning, and that is the story of Anakin. As Anakin begins his journey to become a Jedi and then ultimately to turn to the dark side. And as George Lucas said, and this is the words of the creator, paraphrasing of course, it's the story of fathers, sons, generations, and so on, but how also good people turn bad, and what factors human emotion plays in that, including greed, jealousy, anger, fear, and so on. George Lucas is the master. He's the creator of this story. We are the recipients of this story, of these tales of the Jedi, so to speak, tales of those that have gone on into the Force, the netherworld, so to speak. And then, of course, we look and see all of the characters that are around us supporting this story, and these other characters as they go about their function is to tell the story of fathers, sons, daughters, generations. And then, of course, we meet Obi-Wan Kenobi in episode 4, the original trilogy, and Han Solo, Chewbacca, Princess Leia, as we said, and then some other characters as we come along here, C-3PO, R2-D2, and then we're introduced to the world of Star Wars. In the original trilogy, we're introduced to the world of Star Wars, and then, of course, in episodes 1 through 3, this world is fleshed out, built up, so that we can see the layout of this world, the texture, the various characters that are living in this world, and what their motivations are. And then in episode 1, we see the Republic. In episode 4, we see Civil War, the rebellion against the Empire. And then, of course, in episode 1, the prequels, we see the Republic, the functioning democracy, and how this process leads to a dictatorship, tyranny, and the actual death of liberty. And we'll see all of this as we meet in episodes 1 through 3, Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, we see Obi-Wan Kenobi, we meet him for the first time in this one. Anakin Skywalker, who, as we know later, will be the father of Luke Skywalker and Leia Skywalker, who are twins. Luke and Leia are twins. And then, of course, we have, again, we said Jar Jar Binks, who is the funniest character we've ever had in Star Wars. And he is, of course, the key to the prequels, to understanding this, as he is the funniest of all the characters. And whereas, as we've seen the various characters in their spots in the story as they have been introduced to us, episode 4, beginning with episode 4, and then going to the beginning of episode 1, episode 2, and episode 3. And these, we see some more of the original characters that we met, Obi-Wan, Kenobi, and then, of course, Luke's family, Luke Skywalker's family, and where they came from. Jar Jar Binks, who's the key to all of this, as he's the funniest character we've ever had in any of these movies. And then, of course, it's a very political process, a very political world that we see. And this is all explained in the prequels. And this is all laid out as an established world and an established order in the original trilogy. And then the special effects, the camera work, the lighting, the audio, and all of that serve to help move the story along and tell the story. So it's a fantastical story of humans, beings from other planets, aliens, if you will. And then, of course, the Force, the living force, as we're introduced to this concept of the living force in the prequels. And then, of course, in the original trilogy, we see that the Force is one thing. And then in the prequels, we see the Force is another thing, as explained. But we learn more about each of these aspects of the story from the original trilogy, whether they be characters or the Force or the Empire or the political process or the world in which they live, the intergalactic travels and adventures that we see in the prequels is far beyond any idea that we saw that we could have in the original trilogy for a number of reasons. Number one, of course, this is episodes 4 through 6. But number two, of course, very important, just as important, the technology to make these movies was whatever it was in 1976 and 77. And then the technology to make these movies was, of course, what it was in 1996, 97, and 98, as these movies were released in theaters.
In 1999,
you will see the technology to make these movies has changed, developed, grown, which gives the vision of the director, gives the director's vision more power as we see this vision being brought about before our very eyes and ears. And so, as we look at the prequels, we see an empire yet to be born. In the original trilogy, we see a republic no more. And in the prequels, of course, we see the Jedi, we see their culture, we see their process, we see their world, we see the politics in which they engage and the world that they navigate to fulfill their mission as a Jedi, which is to be keepers of the peace. And then, of course, we see the Sith in each of these aspects of the Force, the light side and the dark side, so to speak. The Force, the living Force, we learn about Jedi masters, trainees, apprentices. And then, of course, we see Padawan learners. And then, of course, we have the weaponry and the tech of all of this going on. The wars, the civil wars, the politics, the manipulations, the greed. We see the Trade Federation. We see a whole new cast of players. And we see weapons being made, droids used as soldiers, clones being developed to serve the will of political personalities that are using the technology and the factors involved in this world to create a situation through which they will gain more power and have more control for various reasons and purposes and motivations. To gain more power, to keep it, to hold it, and also to obtain peace and to bring about peace and order and stability. And in the original trilogy, we see the Jedi are the good guys, so to speak. And in the prequels, we see the Jedi are the bad guys, so to speak, in the sense that we see how their arrogance, their pride, their rigid, dogmatic approach to the Force and the teaching surrounding being a Jedi actually helped to create and support a culture that will eventually lead Anakin to the dark side, as well as other Jedi that we've seen, Count Dooku, and then later we see other characters in this story being taught the ways of the Force, although they might not be Jedi or Sith, such as General Grievous. And then we see the various aspects, parts of the Jedi lifestyle, the Jedi mind trick, the politics, the Jedi Council, the training, the younglings. And then we see in the prequels the degree to which Anakin moves towards the dark side and is actually consumed by the dark side. As we learned in the earlier episodes, the ones that were released first, episodes 4 through 6, Vader was Anakin Skywalker, but he was overtaken by the dark side. Thus, he no longer remained, but he was taken over by Darth Vader, the Sith that Anakin would become when he turned to the dark side. As we see this now in all the stories. Episode 1, Anakin is a slave. Then we meet Padme Amidala, of course, who is the Queen of Naboo. And then, of course, in episode 2, she is a senator from Naboo. A lot of politics in these Star Wars episodes, particularly in the prequels, as the characters live in a world of politics, and they live surrounded by political entities, people motivated by political gain and to seek power. And then we learn more about the dark side, and then of course we learn even more about the Force. So as we go on through the prequels, the original trilogy, the characters that we meet, keep in mind these stories are just stories, friends. And if you want a way to look at them, take a look at them for yourself. If you enjoy the prequels, great. If they're not your thing, super. All ideas are welcome. All input is invited. We will have great respect for the leader of this entire program, the master that gave us all of this, George Lucas. And he is the master. He's the creator of this universe. And we together, as an audience, reading this text, studying this sacred text, if you will, Star Wars, looking at the prequels, the original trilogy, including the holiday special, and also the Clone Wars, the original, the miniseries. We'll look at the words and the concepts as they are articulated by George Lucas and the various team members on the production team, including Rick McCollum. And we look forward to your words, your participation, and your ideas. The prequels, Star Wars, the original trilogy, and I am your host, Mr. The Prequels, and we look forward to joining this conversation and having you as a part of it. May the Force be with us.